Welcome back to another episode of the College 12 Pack. I'm your host, Tyler Natuno. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duke Wire managing editor, Ryan Haley. And Ryan, we did it. We're here.
We made it.
We're at the end of the line. We're less than 24 hours away, less than 48 hours away from the start of the 2024 college football season.
To be fair, you did it. I jumped on this podcast like 3 weeks ago. So
well, we've all been waiting, Ryan. We've all
been
waiting.
That's true. Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, I'm excited. We finally have we reached that stage in the off season like 5 weeks ago where we've already said everything we're going to say about these teams, and we're just kind of like waiting for somebody to show up and put something on tape. And we have one game in particular that's really like, I know week 0 slates are always a little thin. It's usually just a celebration of football coming back. We have one team in particular that has some playoff aspirations that's going to face a bit of a litmus test in week 1.
Yeah, no, I think, there's one game obviously at the top. We're going to get into it. Florida State, Georgia Tech, the pretty bare week 0 slate. There's only 4 games, and that's the only one that pits two Power 4 conference teams against each other.
It's going to take a while.
It's going to take some time. But, we're really excited to actually be able to get in today, talk about some real football, talk about how teams match up against each other and not just, our hypothetical thoughts on these teams. But before we get into that, we've kind of got some news, some pretty big news around the sport to talk about. Leading things off, Iowa coach Kirk Ferentz suspended for the season opener against Illinois State. And not for nepotism, mind you. Nepotism actually remains legal in college football. But no, he was suspended for recruiting violations. It seems to be stemming from the recruitment of transfer quarterback Cade McNamara, who came from Michigan. Not a ton of details on the specifics there, other than the fact that the suspension is stemming from an ongoing NCAA investigation, apparently. This is one of those things to me where, like, the significance here is just seeing someone get punished for something like this. Because, I don't know that it was tampering. Like, I don't want to assume that. But that's just kind of what my mind goes to.
What else can it really be?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's what my mind
I
goes to.
I agree with you, but, like, what other recruiting violation is there?
Yeah, and tampering is one of those things where everyone knows it happens, but no one really.
Hayden Proctor said aloud that he was tampered with in the transfer portal, didn't he?
Yeah, and I literally, he admitted it accidentally, and I literally saw today Chuck Martin, the head coach of Miami, Ohio, they had a kicker get poached in the portal by Alabama.
Really good kicker.
One of the best kickers in the country, and he was talking about, someone asked him about the kicker leaving. He's like, our kicker didn't leave, our kicker was stolen. Who was illegally recruited by Alabama, who tampered with him and stole him. So coaches are not normally willing to go out on a limb and say something like that. But I think this is just, to me, an interesting sign of just seeing some actual consequences for something like that.
I will also say, I agree with everything you just said. I feel like you took the serious approach to this, so I'll take the more comedic one. When I saw Kirk Ferentz suspended for recruiting violations, my first thought was, got to be really funny if this is an offensive player, and I clicked it, and it was a quarterback. So that was really kind of amusing to me. It was like, oh, it'd be really, really on brand. It would be really, really funny if Iowa got suspended for recruiting an offensive guy, and it was literally their quarterback.
It's like, imagine if Dabo tried to portal one time and got busted for tampering. Like, that's kind of what this feels like to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Iowa is not as neglectful of the portal, but it's that kind of you got to imagine Kirk Ferentz just never going to try to portal.
It's like when all your friends had just got their license in high school, and they're telling you how they're running red lights and going 90 on the freeway, and you go 42 and a 35 and get pulled over, and you're like, really?
Exactly.
Seriously?
Exactly.
No, I will say I agree with you that it's a statement that the NCAA is actually cracking down on this and trying to take it seriously. I'm not going to give the NCAA a ton of credit for suspending Kirk Ferentz against Illinois State for one game. No. If this is the bar we're setting, it's something. But it's good to set this precedent going forward, because I think with the direction of college football that we're moving in, as we've talked about ad nauseum, right, wrong, or indifferent, there are going to be less games like that on Power 4 schedules. Maybe eventually Power 2 schedules. Conversation for next offseason, I guess. But maybe that's a positive sign that if you set this precedent now, when Illinois State is the opener, later in the future when teams say the Georgia Clemson game, say that's a more common week 1 kind of game. If you set this precedent now, while teams are more willing to take the punishment that for what it is, maybe it becomes more penal later. But I also don't know if I trust the NCAA to actually enforce it when it becomes more penal. So
No, I think it's hard to like draw massive conclusions about this just beyond the
Yeah,
fact that, hey, like if you get caught pretty blatantly tampering, you might at least be suspended for your home opener against an FCS team. So
we might slap both of your wrists.
yeah, wow.
Yeah, yeah, you know,
They're really
really
ramping things
going
up
for it.
here. No,
Yeah.
but I think that about covers that, talking about recruiting violations there. That's going to bring us to something that, isn't technically a violation. It's not technically illegal
Uh,
in any way, but it's strange nonetheless. This story broke this morning, I believe,
yeah,
from Sports Illustrated.
as of our recording on Thursday afternoon,
Yeah, as
yes.
of our recording on Thursday, it broke this morning from Sports Illustrated. Colorado, former special teams coordinator Trevor Riley, is I believe his name. Yeah, Trevor Riley was apparently admitted that he spent, or not admitted, like he was, being deposed or whatever, but like he said that he spent part of last holiday season in the Middle East, um, lobbying the Saudi Arabian PIF, the Public Investment Fund, for an NIL investment. The Public Investment Fund, they own a number of soccer clubs around Europe. They're obviously most prominent for supporting the Live Tour, the
Live golf.
competition to the PGA Tour. Yeah, Live Golf. I know Ryan, you're a big golf guy, so I'm sure you have some opinions on the PIF and its influence on sports. So I'm kind of curious, what's your take on the nothing ever came of this, which was one of Trevor Riley's frustrations when he was talking about this quote. But what are your thoughts on it? Just the possibility of Saudi PIF money potentially getting involved in college football.
How long do you have? I don't wanna take over the entire podcast. I'm not gonna do that, and I don't wanna go full bleeding hard on here, but, don't normalize Saudi Arabian involvement in American sports is, like, kind of where I'm gonna begin and end that sentiment. I don't know, just, something that I don't know. There's also, on the topic of Live Golf, there was also a report I saw that surfaced over the weekend that the PIF is going to start kind of reanalyzing where it's putting its money, and a lot of their strategy with Live Golf has been to funnel like tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, into some of the biggest names in golf and hope that they make enough money. Like the goal was not to make enough money to make that profitable in the back end. The goal was to make enough money for the tour to keep existing so that they can like hang around in America and like enter that market and normalize their presence there. And there are reports surfacing that they're kind of reanalyzing that strategy and whether or not they're willing to dump money into systems and organizations like Live that weren't really ever designed to be profitable. Um, so I'm curious to see if that means that they end up scaling back their involvement in Western sports leagues or sporting leagues in general. I think they're also involved in Formula One. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of the thing to kind of keep an eye on. But if they don't end up doing that, there's enough money out there and there are enough people like Trevor Riley that it feels like it's kind of an inevitability that they get involved in something like this, especially in the era that we're moving toward, um, which is just kind of unfortunate to me. And I don't know if I want to venture further into those waters than that. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like there are a lot of people. It's just bizarre to me that there are so many people. Trevor Riley's probably a good example who are trying to normalize that through no reason other than the fact that it could be profitable for them or for the fact that it's easier to not think about, and that's strange. So,
Yeah.
definitely, like, something that we probably knew was, like, with how much more money they're putting into sporting leagues around the world, something we probably knew was going to touch college football, especially with the vulnerable spot it's kind of in funding-wise. But still kind of surreal to see the first report. Also, feels like Colorado has like just been stepping on rakes that aren't really in their path for like the last 12 months. And this is another thing, like I don't necessarily want to I don't necessarily want to shine this back to Dion because it doesn't seem like it's not him and it's a guy who's no longer with his program, I believe. Um, but if we had the conversation about Harbaugh last week about how like I don't like even if the head coach wasn't involved, he's kind of involved, like he kind of oversees the program, so everything either has his sign off or it's a sign of his negligence that it didn't get his sign off. I don't want to say that about what Harbaugh did with Sharon Moore last week and like not have that conversation about Dion with this. What do you think about that?
Um, I think that's understandable. The only I guess the only area where I'd maybe push back a little bit is I think that, the Connor Stallion stuff, that was stuff that was so intimately related to game planning and stuff that was going on in the meeting rooms during the week. Whereas,
Yeah,
coaches already have a degree of separation from NIL. They're technically not supposed to be involved in it at all. We know that's not true, but there is still a degree of separation there. So this is something where I maybe could buy that Trevor Riley was seeking this money kind of on his
yeah,
own, which is what he claims he was doing. He claims
yeah,
this was like a separate venture that he was doing himself. But I agree with you. I think you hit the main point that I wanted to touch on here, which is it's just that this was pretty easy to see coming. It's probably not the last time we'll see something like this. I mean, look, when we're talking about, we've already had the conversation about private equity. Like schools potentially looking at bringing private equity in to help them with financial stuff. To me, like, this is a logical extension of that. This is kind of not surprising to see that this is where it's going.
yeah, yeah.
But
Especially if just jump in before we change
yeah,
topics, especially if like the report that I just mentioned about how they're like looking to reanalyze their investment of money, if they're looking to stay in American or Western sports leagues while also like not dumping money in that's not going to churn money back out, football is going to be profitable. No matter
yeah,
what money you put in, you are going to make money on football. So if that's like the tactic they are changing with the PIF, college football has to be like circled, highlighted, and underlined in their meeting rooms. So I don't think this is the last time we're going to see that. No.
nope, totally agree. Something to certainly
Yeah. Yeah.
monitor moving
Yeah.
forward.
I wasn't trying to say that I definitely think on the scale of culpability, what Jim Harbaugh had
Yeah,
in connection to Connor Stallions is way, way higher than what Dion, like what level of culpability Dion has here. I just wanted to acknowledge,
yeah,
I wanted to make sure I pointed out my own little tiny hypocrisy of like, I can't have the argument that head coaches are overseers for everything last week and then not touch it this
yeah.
week. But
No, that's understandable, and I don't think they're one-to-one comparisons, but I understand where you're
mhm.
coming from.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
but yeah, I think those are kind of the two more like serious news items we had to talk about today. But one more thing before we get into previewing these games that I thought was interesting regarding a team that I have in the college football playoff field that you don't, but you think at least is in the mix there. You know, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks get named the starter this week, which is pretty typical timing for that to happen. A lot of these are guys that we expected to be the starter. Not a lot of surprise or intrigue there, but I'd like to take you to Boise State because I think we were all pretty surprised earlier this week when Maddox Madsen named the starting quarterback over Malachi Nelson, former five-star transfer from USC, who, everyone kind of just assumed because of the talent would come in and win this job. But instead it goes to Madsen, who started games in the back half of last year, was pretty good. As they had a nice close to the year and won the Mountain West. But I mean, there's no way to spin this where this looks very good for Malachi Nelson, is there?
No,
Like,
no, this is college football Trey Lance is like what it's kind
yeah.
of like teetering toward.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I mean, I know he's only had 2 years, but like the way things soured at USC and then to come in here and not even win the job. Like I know Madsen was like technically the incumbent, but like I don't know, man.
Yeah, you know what this is going to become. I don't necessarily think it's fair for this to become the take, but I'm sure it's going to become the take if USC struggles a little bit. Lincoln Riley going from like Heisman winner, Heisman runner up to Caleb Williams and like that stretch to
Mhm.
the back half of 2023 and a 2024 season that on paper on the roster looks set up to be pretty underwhelming if you're talking about USC as a national, like in terms of their national prominence.
Mhm.
Um, it's very easy to see a narrative on social media, on talk shows around the country, where a guy like Malachi Nelson, who was brought in to be the Caleb Williams heir apparent, ending up as the Boise State backup, is indicative of a larger trend in Lincoln Riley's national prominence. I don't necessarily think it's fair to make Malachi Nelson the face of that, but that's what it's going to become if USC goes like 7-5. Is everyone going to be like, oh, like he went from Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Baker Mayfield, and Caleb Williams to Malachi Nelson getting benched in the Mountain West?
But then on the other hand, like what if Miller Moss is a Heisman finalist this
That's
year?
true. That's
Like,
absolutely true.
I mean, that just
100%.
bodes even worse because, I mean, it wasn't even a discussion. Like, when Caleb Williams opted out, like, that was Miller Moss's team. And it's been
Hmm.
Miller Moss's team the whole time. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think there was ever any doubt who was going to succeed Caleb Williams at USC this year.
I think
Um,
that the main winners from this take are like the really small crowd of people who are confused why Boise State was in the market for a quarterback after the end of last season. I remember there was like a tiny crowd of
yeah.
people that were like, "What are you talking about? Madsen like won them the Mountain West last year. I don't
Their
understand
quarter,
this move." And they have to feel super vindicated right now.
I just have to say, like, Boise's quarterback situation is just so bizarre to me because they have a guy transfer out to the Power Five in Taylon Green who like wasn't even that good. Goes to Arkansas. I mean, he's very athletic, but he struggles as a passer. And, he obviously got a Power Five gig out of that. Granted, not a great one, but then meanwhile, you've got this incumbent who's pretty good. You portal a guy that everyone presumes is going to start. And then, yeah, like you said, like the incumbent just beats him out, which
and
maybe that shouldn't have been a surprise to us given the way that
and
Madsen played last year. But
Portal, a guy who probably had a long list of NIL suitors who were willing to fork up, like maybe not necessarily like up in the millions like we've seen in some recruits, but I don't think Malachi Nelson was exactly like a prospect that boosters were shrugging their shoulders at around the country. Like Boise
no,
State probably had to win a bit of a bidding war for him.
I'm
Um,
sure. I mean, I'm sure there
so
were
that's going to be
power
a
conference suitors
yeah,
too. Like,
that's going to be an interesting conversation for the first full year on the job. That's got to be a really interesting conversation to have with Boise State administration and boosters of like, yeah, I understand that we brought in this 5-star quarterback from USC who has a bunch of pedigree. I'm going with the other guy. That's going to be a fun combo.
yeah. Which, I mean, kind of just checks out with how Boise operates. It's a pretty insular program. They like to hire
Yeah.
people with ties to the program and stuff like that. So that all just kind of makes sense to me. Um,
Yeah, it does. But
but I
still,
think that's enough preamble. I think it's time
I
to
agree.
get into these games and talk about some actual matchups that we're going to be watching on Saturday. And I think we'll just take this in order, and that's going to kick us off with the biggest game of the day and the first game of the day. Florida State taking on Georgia Tech at noon on ESPN in Dublin, Ireland. Now, FSU obviously a team that comes into this season looking for revenge against seemingly the entire world. It feels
Paul
like
Feinbaum.
pretty much everyone and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously went 13-0 last year, missed the playoff, the kind of thing that would never happen again in any realistic situation for FSU. And now they opened the season though, I think, against a Georgia Tech team that like, I mean, sneakily good 7-6 year in the first full year under Brent Key last year. Like,
Oh
Ryan, am I
yeah.
am I crazy for saying that I think Georgia Tech can, if not win this game, like be extremely competitive in it?
Yeah, this is an exceptionally lose-lose start for Florida State in terms of scheduling because it's a team that has had a lot of narrative momentum behind them and their fan base, and a lot of semi-controversial narrative momentum. As there are a lot of debate the merit of what they're saying, but there are a lot of national analysts who are openly talking about how exhausted they are about hearing Florida State complain about last year's playoff selection, Paul Feinbaum. Um, and They're playing a team that, on paper, if you compare the two programs, they should blow Georgia Tech out by 2 or 3 scores very comfortably. But I think all of the conversations about the 2023 playoff have weirdly kind of brushed under the rug how much talent Florida State lost this offseason. I mean, you lost Jordan Travis, who's kind of like quarterback Jordan Travis, who's kind of mentally associated with the resurrection of the program. Keon Coleman, who was the first pick of the second round at wide receiver, first round edge rusher, and Jared Verse. Um, like they lost a lot of NFL talent and NFL talent at like high impact positions. Just with those three guys alone, you lost Trey Benson at running back. He's gone to the NFL. Um, and I think that's something that if Florida State, everybody kind of only has room for like one association with the program in the offseason. And Florida State's association has been the playoff, and they lost a lot of talent. And Georgia Tech gained a lot of talent, especially on defense. I looked through their transfer portal acquisitions. They got like 4 DBs from like 3 DBs from Power 4 programs. They got Warren Burrow from Tennessee, who's a 6th-year guy. They got Zachary Toba from Illinois, Jaden Davis from Cincinnati. They got Saeed Gibbs from Rhode Island, who had 3 interceptions and nearly 40 tackles last year. They got a bunch of defensive linemen from the Power 4, Jaden Vanderberg from Penn State, Romello Height from USC, Thomas Gore from Miami. They got EJ Lightsley and Jackson Hamilton from Georgia and Louisville, a linebacker. a lot of these guys are like sophomore, junior, like former 3-star. A few of them are former 4-star prospects out of high school. Feels a little wrong to call them reclamation projects, but guys who didn't get much playing time at like blue chip programs, like 7 or 8 of them flooded into Georgia Tech this offseason. And if even like 4 of them hit, this could be one of the best defenses in the ACC. That's not necessarily a guarantee, but Brent Key does not need all of those guys to live up to their high school billing in order for this to be a very good defense. And quarterback Haynes King led the ACC in touchdown passes last year. They had 2 ranked wins. So this is a team that Florida State will get made fun of if they don't blow out Georgia Tech, but I don't think they necessarily have as big of a talent disparity as it looks on paper.
No, I fully agree. And I think, talking about the defense, like, yeah, just focusing so much on transfers, lost a ton of production on that side of the ball, frankly, from a defense that wasn't all that great to begin with last season. But the one thing that does interest me, and again, I don't know how much we can take away from what this team's strengths were defensively last year because of all the new faces, but as much as this team struggled against the run last year, they were better, at least, like semi-solid against the pass, which is an interesting first test for a quarterback in DJU that I think, we just kind of know who he is at this point. I think he's capable of doing some things, but he has his limitations. Those are very obvious. I don't expect them to change this year. So I think it's maybe a potentially tough first test for them. And just in general for the offense, I think they did a decent job portaling. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think Roydell Williams and Malik Benson are the same caliber replacement for for Trey Benson and Keon Coleman. I think that's part of the reason I'm so bullish on an FSU step back this season, at least to some degree. I am curious because I do really like this defense for FSU, even with guys they lost. I look at a guy like Patrick Payton, I think he could be better than Jared Verse, potentially at least. He's a really, really good player. Ooh. They've got guys. I mean, they've got guys like Fentrell Cypress. They've got good players in that defense, despite what they lost and the production they lost. I'm just curious because it is a good Georgia Tech offense they're playing. Haynes King was not incredible, but was productive and pretty solid last season, I thought, in his first season at Georgia Tech. They also bring back a 1,000-yard rusher. So, with so much returning production on this offense, you do kind of wonder if they'll be able to stress test this kind of new look FSU defense. I kind of expect that FSU will pull away in this game just because of the fact that, we just have so many questions about Georgia Tech's defense. I don't think this is the team that's going to shut them down by any means, but I do think Georgia Tech does have the offensive explosiveness to make this a game, especially if FSU's defense isn't quite as turnkey as I personally think it kind of could be.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's I guess that's why I'm so excited and calling it a litmus test for Florida State. Yeah. Like you said, I agree with everything you said about DJU at quarterback, and I think that the gamble, I don't think obviously Norvell would never say this out loud, but the gamble with bringing in a guy like DJU is trusting that you have enough talent that he can win you the ACC. And that was a gamble that Dabo took and kind of succeeded to varying levels of success, depending on who you ask. But yeah, no, I think if Florida State, the most likely outcome is that Florida State is winning by 3 at halftime and then wins by 13 or 17.
Yeah. I agree.
But if Florida State pulls away early in the first half, we're talking about a team that could be within the top 7 or 8 for most of the season and probably is on a fast track to earn a bye in the college football playoff. If they're trailing early, the ACC feels very different.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of suspect Georgia Tech will be a pretty similar team to what they were last year, kind of in that 7-5 range. Maybe they make an 8-4 kind of push, but I think this is the conference that if you we talked about on our playoff prediction show last week. If you want to pick someone that could come out of nowhere to have a pretty good year, and this is the conference where it could happen. But yeah, I think would be massively concerned about Florida State, even with the fact that they don't have a gauntlet of a schedule. If they're struggling in this game, in Ireland.
Nobody is going to be watching this game more closely than Dabo Swinney and Mario Cristobal.
Surely. Yep.
If Florida State looks kind of shaky, all of a sudden, a 10-win ACC champion is in play. And that means you only get one spot in the playoff, but you do have a guaranteed spot in the playoff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that all starts with a conference game in week 0 in Ireland, which is going to certainly be interesting for us. But moving on to what is probably at least one of the best chances we're going to get all season for an FCS over FBS upset. We got Montana State at New Mexico at 4 p.m. Eastern on FS1. Now, I say upset extremely loosely there. The Bobcats are a 13.5-point favorite in this game last I checked.
Kind of nuts.
I don't know if I've seen FCS teams favored before over FBS. I don't think I've ever seen a spread quite this big, but like, it's understandable. I mean, this is a really good Montana State program. They're top 5 ranked team in the FCS coming into the year. A little bit of a disappointing. They still made the playoffs and finished in the top 10, but by their standards, a bit of a disappointing year last year. But program that's been in 3 of the last 4 semifinals, FCS semifinals, if not making it further. I think they made it to the title one year too. Against the New Mexico team that, 4-8 last year, kind of blowing it all up and restarting with a new head coach in Bronco Mendenhall, who we've seen have success at BYU and at Virginia, sort of to varying degrees in each of those stops. But this is a tough job. I think this is one of the harder rebuilds you're going to see in college football this year. Ryan, can New Mexico avoid an upset here?
Like physically, yeah. I don't think I would pick New Mexico, even with that spread. I mean, like you said, Montana State felt like it was a bit of a disappointing season for them last year. They went 8-4 with one score loss, and they lost to North Dakota State, which is the FCS powerhouse, by a point in the playoffs. Yeah, I think the biggest thing I have circled for New Mexico this year is like, do they look somewhat competitive by November? Because like this is like the tier job that I think a guy like Bronco Mendenhall is kind of built for, is like off the beaten path program. You can completely rebuild it in your own image from the ground up. The expectations aren't to win 9-10 games; they're to win like 7. But we haven't seen Bronco Mendenhall do this in this era of college football. That stint with BYU, that stint with Virginia, like, even though they weren't that long ago, and he's still someone that we have pretty recent memories with, if you haven't like rebuilt a program since 2022, you're it's kind of like your first job again. And I'm like, do you think Bronco Mendenhall can do that at New Mexico? I mean, there's no real evidence, but we're not going to know until we see it. But do you have any faith in him to handle the NIL transfer portal era?
I think that obviously remains to be seen, but I do think that if anyone can win at this job, it's probably him, because he's, he kind of is cut from the cloth of like the more old school, like, culture builder guy, like, true like football coach, motivator kind of guy. Like, that's sort of the programs he's built in the past. And yeah, I don't know in an era of the sport that's so personnel focused how that's going to play out. But I do think that there is the potential here. I mean, I think, look, we've seen New Mexico State, their in-state rival, who they was, historically in an even worse spot than them, have kind of a renaissance the last couple of years. I don't know if that's sustainable, but it can be done. And I think New Mexico being in the Mountain West has the chance to capitalize on that more than their rivals do. Looking at this team, if I had to say like one thing I like, one thing I don't like, the thing I do kind of like, and it's intriguing to me, is the quarterback position. Devin Dampier, a guy who didn't play a ton last year, but played pretty well in limited action, had like 6 touchdowns, no picks, like 70-something% completion in the few games he played in. So I think that's a promising pickup there. The thing that I guess is not as promising is the fact that he's playing behind an offensive line that I believe has 5 projected transfer starters. I don't like that. I don't like that one bit. That will probably make things tough for this young man. So, yeah, it's hard to really, this is about as year 0 as it gets. Just roster not in a great spot. You had a lot of turnover after a team that wasn't very good, and you got a new staff in place. Like, let this one play out, give him time to build, but it's probably going to start off with a loss to an FCS team.
Yeah. And that's kind of like I'm sure like the message that New Mexico State is just preaching as hard as it can behind the scenes is like the Bronco Mendenhall era does not start and end on Saturday against Montana State, because it just can't. If you start
just a better program than them right now.
Yes,
it's like
at this
objectively
point,
a better program.
But you can't play the game of we just lost to an FCS team and like not have the nuance of like what this program is and how long it's going to take to rebuild it.
Absolutely. Fully agree with that. But that will take us to the nightcap in primetime, the only other game this week that features two FBS teams facing off against each other. We got SMU heading on the road to play Nevada, 8 p.m. on CBS Sports Network. You know, we're going to be kind of forcing it to get some narrative out of this game. I don't think this is going to be a particularly good game. You know, SMU, a team.
If you like SMU's offense, this will be a very fun game. I think.
It could be.
But
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, SMU is just an intriguing team because I think a lot of people feel like they have the chance to make some noise in the ACC this year in their first year as a power conference team. Were really good last year, won 11 games. Just gonna have to see how it translates. I think they're gonna have pretty much no problems in this game, though. I mean, you know, they lose some key pieces on offense, but they got continuity where it matters the most with Preston Stone, who's a very good quarterback, potentially one of the best in the entire ACC this year. One thing that, you know, I didn't even realize, I knew this team was pretty good defensively last year. I didn't know they were top 15 good defensively. They were insanely good. You know, obviously lose some guys, but, you know, I think, you know, it's fair to expect they're not going to be a top 15 unit on that side of the ball again this year, just with the increase in competition. But like, again, you're not going to see that against a Nevada team that is, you know, bringing back a quarterback and I mean, they bring some guys back. Like they bring back like a running back who had like 3.5 yards a carry. They bring back a quarterback who didn't play very well and Brendan Lewis, but like none of those things make you feel that good for Jeff Choate, who comes into this job. Just, I mean, they went 2-10 the last 2 years, fired Ken Wilson after he went 4-20 in 2 years. You know, Choate, I think was a good hire. Like it's a good fit for the job. Co-defensive coordinator at Texas previously, but before that was actually the head coach at Montana State for like 4 years. You know, knows how to win, you know, do more with less, knows how to win at under-resourced jobs. But man, this Nevada team has just been in a rough spot since Jay Norvell dipped for Colorado State a few years ago. And I don't know how it's getting better anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the only thing to watch in this game is Preston Stone to me. Like you've already talked about it. One of the like continuity. He was one of the I think he was one of PFF's top 5 quarterbacks in the FBS last year. And he threw for 28 touchdowns and had nearly 3,200 yards, and he did that with like an average depth of target like over 13 yards. I think he was tied for first among qualifying FBS quarterbacks. He's a little undersized. He's only like 6'1", 6'2", if you measure him pretty generously. But if you're looking for a guy who could like kind of force his way into day 2, maybe even potentially late day 1 NFL draft discussions at the end of the year, if Preston Stone has another super productive year, they lost quarterback coach Jonathan Brewer. He's now the offensive coordinator at Duke. But if he puts together another really productive year, especially in the ACC, he's a guy who, like in a very weak quarterback class, at least on paper, early in the year, he's a guy who could really vault himself forward despite some questions about his size. So I think this is going to be more of a game for him to show off than a real genuine test for him. But he's like the only person that I really have kind of circled. I'd be surprised if this SMU team does not win at least 7 games in the ACC in year 1. Not in the ACC, but like if they don't go 7-5.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm with you. I mean, I think to me, like this is kind of a will SMU win by a lot of points, and we'll be like, okay, this could be a fun team in the ACC, or will they win by only, you know, 7 to 10 points, and we're like, okay, maybe the lost production will make things a little tough for this team going into ACC play. But I don't really see any way. I mean, I don't see any way they lose this game to Nevada in first game under Jeff Choate, who's again in about as year zero gets here at Nevada.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the only other thing to watch with SMU, this is a school that has had boosters that have funneled a lot of money into this program and this athletic department over the last few years, especially with this transition to the ACC and their penalty for revenue sharing for leaving the American. So I think the bar for this is probably higher than people think on paper. But if they look really impressive and SMU gets to like a 6-3, 6-2 start to the season, you might see some conversations about Rhett Lashley like with other bigger jobs.
Oh, absolutely.
And absolutely. I think the bar for that is higher than people realize because of how much money is in SMU and how like sneaky good of a recruiting place it is and how like good it like its history is better than you think, and it's in a very like better recruiting area, obviously Texas, than it can sometimes sound on paper. But if some big Power 4 coaches start to disappoint the way we think we do, and SMU like really passes with flying colors year one in the ACC, Rhett Lashley's going to get his name thrown around a lot.
Quick question before we move on, Ryan. Apropos of nothing, do you know what Rhett Lashley's last job was?
I feel like this is a gotcha that you're really kind of angling. I don't like the way you're laughing at me as you do this. I don't, off the top of
He
my head.
was the offensive coordinator at Miami, and I will leave it at that.
Interesting. Doing like the Brian Windhorst like pointing
Yeah,
me.
exactly.
Now think about
Exactly.
that. Why would that happen? Yeah.
But that takes us through the games that you can watch if you're, a normal person with a normal TV subscription. But for the real sickos,
Ooh,
for the
come
real
on. We're
sickos, we got
we're pro
one more
sicko
for you.
here on this
Oh,
podcast.
I'm
We're
I'm one
very
of
pro
them.
sicko.
There's a reason that I have like half a page of notes about Delaware State playing Hawaii. That's the kind of sicko I am. Yeah, so we got Delaware State, Hawaii. That game kicks off at 11:59 Eastern on Saturday night. So for those of you who are insomniacs like
Not
me,
midnight.
yeah,
11:59.
11:59
Very,
because
very
I don't
important.
think they can start a game at midnight. I think that's the key
No.
distinction. The game has
Very,
to kick
very important.
before midnight on the East Coast. But I mean, not a lot to talk about here football wise. All I got to say is it's pretty unfortunate that you have to go to Hawaii to probably get killed, and you don't even get to spend your entire trip in Hawaii because you miss your flight out of JFK due to what the program has described as "quote unquote" a bus snafu.
God,
So
this game is like early lead for sicko game of the year. It's
it
like
could
it's
be
trying really hard to make sure it's building a strong clubhouse lead in week 0. A bus snafu?
a bus snafu. That was the official language that I saw used. A bus. They had an issue like getting to JFK and missed their flight. So yeah, I mean, not a great
Uh,
start to the trip for a team that is coming off a 1-10 season and was picked to finish last in the MEAC this year.
yeah, not great.
No, I think looking at Hawaii, though, I mean, obviously they're a huge favorite in this game. I think like 40 points definitely should win it. I do think this is kind of an interesting program because it's, I mean, just one of the toughest jobs in the entire country
Yeah.
due to circumstances that were kind of inside of its control and ones that are out of it. I mean, just geography, the travel budget this team has to have, the recruiting difficulties, resources. It's tough. And then they're dealing with, a bad fallout from the previous coaching staff. I mean, Timmy Chang came in like a year -2 or something like
Yeah,
that. And
100%.
and and honestly is kind of overachieved. Like they went 5-8 last year. That's like not bad for where
No.
this program like should be trajectory wise. I don't know if they're like poised to take another big leap this year, but like, hey man, you know what? I kind of like some pieces here, right? Okay, they bring back a solid quarterback in Braden Shager. He wasn't great, but he was fun. Pretty inconsistent, but he was fun. They
Listen, if
bring back,
Miami can do anything, it is like not great but fun quarterbacks. That is like the brand of the program.
yeah, exactly. And they also bring back their leading rusher from last year, their top 2 receivers, including 1,000-yard guy and Stephen McBride, who had a offseason legal situation, was away from the team for a while. But as far as I can tell, I think he's back and will be playing in this game on Saturday. So, and then they get to open against one of the worst teams in the FCS. So, sure, you're playing in a converted soccer stadium, and who knows when the renovations to their state, or I think they're building a new stadium from scratch now that I think about it. But, who knows when that's going to be done. This program is facing a lot of just, has a lot of weights around its neck, a lot of things keeping it from being one of the top teams in the Mountain West. But I think Timmy Chang is the guy for the job. I think he's done a pretty admirable job, all things considered, so far. And I'm curious if they can take another leap this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think the real thing for Hawaii that I wanted to mention, you went for the optimistic note about Timmy Chang. I'll go for kind of the pessimistic note. Everything that you're talking about of the difficulties of the program, I think are kind of why a lot of the Todd Graham stuff really got swept away in national outlets.
And it's just
Like
Hawaii, but yeah.
yeah, and it's Hawaii, but it's a school that's like not fully like little more than 2 years removed from a pretty bad player mistreatment scandal. Um, that I think if it happens to a school among the like continental 48 United States, it probably gets a lot more run than it did.
Yeah.
Um, And so I think that's another unfortunate thing for this program and the coaches trying to rebuild it is you are coming into a year -2 situation where not a lot of people understand why it's a year -2. Um, but you're also like the face of sicko football, and a lot of people have memories of like the Colt Brennan era of Hawaii football, and they're like, why is this team with a losing record? So I think that's a little another piece, like another thing that's like kind of unfortunate for any staff that goes to Miami is it's kind of a school that
Hawaii,
everyone
you
has
mean?
like yeah, Hawaii is like it's kind of a school where everyone has memories of like the 2 or 3 years they were really good, and then no one thinks about them again. And so I think it's unfortunate that this program and the players who were affected 2 3 years ago didn't get as much attention as other player mistreatment scandals have. And so I think it's like you were saying, even more impressive than I think we can kind of process that this team won 5 games last year.
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of, if you're not familiar with the Todd Graham situation, like this was a deal where the roster of players essentially forced their hand. Like everyone threatened to leave, essentially. Like they wouldn't have been able to field a team. Just kind of allegations of yeah, like you said, mistreatment, abuse from the coaching staff. Just things like I remember seeing reporting that Todd Graham had like would basically just like straight up tell players he just wanted to do this for 2 years and get a job in the NFL. Like he was like he was like telling players brazenly that he wasn't in this for the long haul. Just a dire cultural situation there. So Timmy Chang, like on top of dealing with, like I talked about, all the structural issues that just come with being at Hawaii, they've had to deal with even more than that. Just with their building and the situation that they've been dealing with. So yeah, I mean, hard to really expect anything of this program. For a while they were kind of, plucky, like they could come in and have a year where they'd win 10, 11 games and make a splash. They're a long time away from doing anything like that, I think. And truthfully, like not to be, because I was doing the pessimist or the optimist thing earlier, not to be too pessimistic, I don't really know if they can ever do that again. Like I don't know if that's even possible now, with where the G5 has gone since then. Like there
I was
weren't
like
teams
the
like
only
well, I was just saying, like, look at the Sun Belt. Like, look how many teams have emerged in like that are much better resourced, much bigger programs in better recruiting states. Like, those didn't really exist 15, 20 years ago when Hawaii was going on these runs. Like, I don't know if they can do that again, especially in the
yeah,
Mountain West.
the only argument I can think of is if the scheduling gets even more segmented and they just don't play any of those programs anymore. But I feel like that's like also a dire commentary on the future of
What are you
college
talking about?
football. So
Like Indy, Hawaii? Is that kind of what you mean?
not like I don't know. I don't really know. It's just a potential future where like what we're seeing with the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of like revenue sharing among programs that put more money in, if we see like some kind of small reflection of that in the group of five, um, there's a future where that happens, and like teams from the Sun Belt, like Tulane, or Appalachian State or Coastal Carolina, are like, we're just gonna like revolt and form our own like mini super conference, and Hawaii just ends up playing New Mexico and Idaho and other people. I don't know, just constantly.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
even then,
maybe
it's like not a
if
fun reality to like really go down that path.
no, like I don't think there's any path where this is a great situation for Hawaii. So I like
They're never making a New Year's Six bowl again. I don't think.
no.
I think is the way.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, no.
yeah.
Yeah, they're never getting that G5 playoff spot. And
No.
yeah, I think look, I like what they're doing. You face a million structural issues, bring in a program legend. He knows what it takes to win there. He's had a successful track record himself as a head coach, like outside of here. Let him stay, let him build, see if you can get back to some level of competence, because it's been a long time and you face just so many disadvantages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that about covers the situation at Hawaii, and I think that about covers this slate of week 0 games. Like I said, it's not the best week 0 that we've seen. I think last year there were more games than 4. I don't know if there were any games as good as Florida State, Georgia Tech though, so we'll take that. But ultimately, just looking forward to having some football back on our screens, and we'll have some real football to talk about when we see you again on Monday when we recap week 0. Then we'll be back on Wednesday for our what should be a very meaty preview of week 1. Looking forward to it. But for Ryan, I'm Tyler. Thanks for joining the College 12 Pack. We'll see you next week.